Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Energeia's webinar on the impact of COVID on transport electrification. Today, we're going to talk about some of the public domain forecasts that are out there and some of the key trends that we're seeing in the industry and in the market, and how that is playing into those forecasts. Then we're going to briefly just touch on how we do transportation modeling, because we do things a little bit differently, and I think it's worth understanding this methodology so you understand how that is factored into our own forecasts of what EV adoption is looking like to us. Then we're going to talk about the potential impacts of COVID and how COVID impacts on transportation demand, as well as people's choices around electrification of that transportation. And then finally, we'll share with you our latest forecast update for New South Wales. Following that, we will have a Q&A, and for those not able to join today, we will record this session, and attendees will also be free to forward it on. So I look forward to the conversation. Now, at any time, you're welcome to drop questions into the chat. At the Q&A session, we'll be going through those and doing our best to answer them. So let's begin. Key public domain forecasts, and really in the public domain, there is one forecast that is a bit is really the forecast that people go to, and of course that's the market operator's forecast. And what we're showing here is their forecast of the number of vehicles over the period to FY35 back in 2020 with their central case, which was the called the central case. And you can see there they were anticipating about 1 million vehicles in New South Wales in FY35. Now, due to the significant activity, including the rise of solar PV, battery adoption, and also demand for things like electric vehicles, the industry, as part of the ongoing forecasting working group, signaled to the market operator that they believed and they supported a change from the AMO Central to the AMO Step Change scenario in 2022 as being the most likely scenario to emerge based on consensus. And you can see the move to the step change scenario more than doubled the market operator's forecast of EV adoption by FY35 from 1 million to nearly 2.5 million vehicles. Now, in terms of good reasons for why the industry would support this sort of a change include things like significant increases in petrol prices, increased availability of vehicles. There's just a lot more choice that folks have in Australia for electrifying their transport, and a number of announcements by different states, including New South Wales, of support for public charging infrastructure, which is a key barrier to buying an electric vehicle, particularly if you don't have a second vehicle. Or if you want to drive long distances and there's no way to recharge. So that's a really key marker for potentially more demand in the future. And the other key, I guess, driver of future demand includes vehicle grants and rebates, for example, in Victoria. So for all of these reasons, I think one logical conclusion would be, hey, we're more likely to get a lot more vehicle adoption. And in Energeia's own work, we've identified and we share the view that a number of these factors are pointing in the direction of a higher rate of uptake. And you can see here in our own analysis, we have our 2020 analysis of EV model availability. So this is the percentage of vehicles that come in electric form. And before we had electric vehicles, we had hybrid electric and we had diesel. So it's a similar concept. And the reason why it's so significant is the analysis we've done, including back on diesel cars, is that folks tend to like a certain manufacturer and they like a certain body, a style, or model. And until they have the ability to choose the model and make that they prefer, they may not choose to electrify. So model availability is a key driver or a key factor in total uptake. And you can see here back in 2020, we were seeing only about 10 to 20% electrification until FY 2027. A lot of that was just a delay in receiving models that are available in places like North America or Europe, and that has reflected a traditional delay in getting new technology, some new technology, into Australia. But based on recent announcements, we had pretty significantly changed our view so that we were expecting to hit 20% model availability this year, um, and rising significantly above that. And that still is our view. So let's talk a little bit about how you model demand for electric vehicles and what drives our particular model. And where I'd like to start with is the actual modeling of demand for transport services. And what we mean by that is how much people are going to drive, basically, and whether or not they're driving to deliver freight, or they're driving to deliver people, including the use of private vehicles. Now, normally, you have a demand model, and then it gets split by mode share. So whether or not people use passenger vehicles, they use public transport, they use airplanes, and then that goes into a stock utilization, right? Because people will continue with the existing stock unless there's more demand, and then they have to increase the stock, and then that goes into our, what uptake do they actually decide to do? Do they buy an internal combustion engine vehicle? Do they buy an electric vehicle, or do they buy a fuel cell vehicle, for example? Um, and what we're highlighting here is the impact of COVID can be a number of directions. One is what sort of demand there is for transport in the first place, but a lot of it is in the mode share and whether or not, we saw, for example, in the early days of COVID, people decided to stop using public transport because of the health risks involved. They did a lot more driving private in their private vehicles. And then we saw a shift away from using private vehicles to doing a lot more telecommuting, which is where we are mostly today. And one of the questions is, well, is this the new normal, or at some point will we return to long-term patterns? And I think the jury's still out on that. But just in this analysis alone, as we'll see when we go to the next model, you have a number of effects that we believe need to be considered when forecasting future electric vehicle adoption. So our other model, which goes hand in hand with our demand forecasting model, and this is the stock and turnover model, you see here the stock growth by mode and the travel activity growth feed into this model fundamentally here, where you've got new sales by tech, and the new sales is informed by how many new vehicles and how many replacement vehicles are needed, and then what are the options and what are their cost relativities. And so to the extent that COVID is impacting on tech costs, right, you cannot find a vehicle at a discount. All of the pricing premiums are rising, so that impacts on vehicle choice, and that's if you can even get the vehicle. And with supply chain difficulties, getting access to electric vehicles is now a lot harder. So both of these factors, which are being impacted by COVID, impact on new sales. The other one, which may not come to mind, and something that surprised me when I was digging into the results, was annual travel activity. So if people, because of the change in mode share or just change to their lifestyles, are not driving as much per year, they're not going to see as much of a benefit from transport electrification, which tends to have a higher upfront cost and a lower ongoing cost. So this impacts on the economics as well. So hopefully this has highlighted exactly where different COVID impacts could be impacting on vehicle choices here in terms of relativities, but also the total number. All right, so as a visual, we have this graphic here, which is showing what the average transit changes from pre-COVID levels. And you can see here in 2020, there was that big dive in public transport, and less people driving to work and more people driving for private near their home. And this has continued and in fact, it's gotten, public transport even dipped further during COVID surges. And although this is up to February of this year, the key question is what do we think the long-term impact is going to be of COVID, um, based on historical expectations and also a lot of guesswork. So, as we said in the previous slide, the impacts impact both on the demand for transport, which impacts on actual miles driven, as well as stock availability and price. And I've got miles here, and I apologize for that, but kilometers traveled. Um, and so we've provided here the impact in terms of technology adoption, which is that our own forecast, despite having really strong positive drivers around higher petrol prices, which are going to encourage more EV adoption, more EV availability, um, better charging infrastructure, and even more grants helping to bring down that price premium. Our view, which you can see here in 2021 for New South Wales, has changed in that we expected to see a liftoff in sales from around FY25, so a few years out, and then to sort of increase at a sort of an S-curve method, reaching about 1.75 million by FY35. The latest the latest forecast that we have has pushed out the timing of when we see that liftoff to FY26. A lot of that is just based on um, the price differentials, uh, but we see a steeper incline after that. And ultimately, because of the change in all these other factors, particularly the acceleration of model availability, we do see more vehicle adoption compared to our previous forecast from FY30, and about 10% higher here, 10 to 15% higher here compared to our previous forecast. Okay, well, that was hopefully short but sweet. So I think we're going to now spend some time with Q&A. If you want to load any questions into the chat, please feel free to do so, and we will try and answer them now. I think compared to our previous webinars, this has been a lot less controversial, perhaps. Okay, we've got one from Tim. Thank you. What is the likely impact of vehicle to home, or I think maybe the second one was supposed to be vehicle to grid on sales? So I think from our experience, to the extent that we actually see vehicle to grid models available in Australia, um, they really are a game changer for so many different reasons. You move from, maybe you've got a Tesla Powerwall that's about 14 kilowatt hours in your garage or outside of it, to having something closer to 80 kilowatt hours in your garage. And so your ability to ride through outages, your ability to shape your demand is massively different. And I don't think we've really fully understood how that is going to potentially change um, uh, people's return on investment. Having said that, if a lot depends on what sort of rebates incentives are out there, and if you're on a flat tariff, it's not going to necessarily change a lot unless you are in an outage situation. But just generally, it is so much battery storage, and to the extent people embrace it, it really is a game changer. All right, we have a question from James. What is our view on the uptake of small commercial vehicles? Well, that view is becoming more educated by the day. We've got a number of projects that are looking specifically at fleets, and the key here is really model availability and the price tag. I mean, generally fleets have high kilometers, and some of those applications suit electric vehicles quite well. And we're seeing in other markets like North America a huge amount of choice now And most of the major players, whether it's UPS or Amazon, looking to convert quite quickly to electric vehicles. Um, I think for the larger, for the small, you've not asked a question for the medium to larger size. The challenge there is just weight and battery size and cost. Um, but small commercial, I think once there's a reasonable ute, that's going to be quite attractive. And we see, with at least three of the truck companies coming out, including Rivian, with some pretty attractive models. I mean, I myself have been considering buying a truck, which I've not had. I've not driven a truck for about 30 years. I think says something about the potential here. It is a truck with vehicle to grid though, so I would add that. Yeah, good question. So Alex has asked, how permanent do you believe the COVID habits and behaviors will be in terms of vehicle usage? Um, Oh, it's a hard one. Look, some of the analysis we did when we looked at this for the Commonwealth was looking at other major shocks, whether it was 9/11 or SARS, and its impact on air travel, and that recovered pretty quickly. Now, what's I think really different about this particular shock is the improvements in video conferencing like this, and changes in work habits. Um, so I think this is something that is very difficult to anticipate. And so, using a scenario approach here of what do you think the sort of ranges are and the most likely is probably the best way to go. Um, we are creatures of habit, but things do change. So sorry, I can't be more categorical. Tim's follow-up question: do you see a policy that supported maybe mandated EV use as taxis or rideshare driving wider uptake? Oh, look, that's something that we are already seeing in California. In fact, most of the different fleets have to be electrified by 2035. You've got a new government. There's a lot of potential here, but it's going to be difficult and costly to implement if we don't have access to the vehicles, um, which right now is a big challenge. The supply chain at the moment globally is really not in good shape, and we hear stories of hundreds of thousands, maybe tens of thousands of GM trucks sitting on their lot because they don't have a certain chip. Electric. Okay, so Arundel asked a question about the future of potentially electrification of air travel. So we did look at this, and whether it's electrification or hydrogen, there's a number of different options for decarbonizing air travel. Whether you're talking about renewable jet fuel, which is really just taking, it could be renewable energy and creating hydrogen. You have to have a carbon stream, and then translating that into something that can go through the turbines to a hydrogen onboard hydrogen solution. Um, to batteries, I mean, batteries are pretty heavy, so I don't know that we're ever going to get to a battery solution, but certainly I've seen a number of viable solutions from drop-in fuel replacements to something that is burning hydrogen potentially, although I think people will probably be a bit leery of getting into anything that's powered by hydrogen in the air. People have long memories. All right, well, look, it's let me know if there's any other questions. Otherwise, I think we can get everybody back to the rest of their day. Oh, okay, we got a couple more. Um, do you observe vehicle manufacturers being hesitant to supply Australian markets due to right-hand drive bespoke? So we did a project for the ESAA, and we were looking at where the cars are coming from, and it is a bit of a challenge um, that it is right-hand drive. And when we were looking at where you could get natural gas-fired vehicles, um, I think it was Iran was another potential suppliers, and so it was just difficult to find sources for these vehicles. And certainly, if you're left-hand drive, the market's much bigger. I mean, it's Thailand, it's Japan, it's the UK, and that I think that has an impact. But I don't actually think that's the biggest impact. The biggest impact, I think, and we showed this in the CEFC arena project that we did that's in the public domain, that people with cars tended to put them where the policymakers provided the largest grants. And to the extent that there are more grants on the table in Australia, I bet you're going to see a lot more models and a lot more just numbers. Let's see, Josh, how much does the U.S. chip bill increase supply of chips? And increase, boy, that's a very specific question, and I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. In fact, I haven't even heard of the U.S. chip bill, so we'll have to do some digging there. All right, I think the one last thing we'd ask of, oh, great, one last thing we'd ask of you, and this is to inform how we go forward. Oh, we got a couple more questions, but if you could, and I'll come back to the questions. Some of the topics we're considering for next time are how to deploying public charging infrastructure at least cost, estimating the levelized cost of hydrogen no matter where you are, or best practice integrated distribution resource planning. I'd be interested in your views. If you could just pop over to the polls, or I'm not even sure how it works. Oh, it looks like people are already providing some answers. So please look at the poll option in your screen, and let's all vote on that, and we'll provide an answer just after I speak to these other questions. James said, do you think the consumer desire for EVs outweighs pure economic decisions, or only for early adopters? Well, I don't. Some people are buying EVs, and certainly I think a lot of people bought Toyota Priuses for environmentally conscious reasons. One of the reasons I personally bought an EV was when I got into it and I pushed down on the pedal and I went faster to 100 kilometers than I'd ever been before. So it really had a performance advantage. And yeah, there are other reasons, just operating costs, etc. So once we solve range anxiety and once we solve refill times, almost on any other dimension, EVs are a dominant technology. They perform better on almost any of the other dimensions. And the question is, how fast can we refuel them? And they might be really more convenient, right? With wireless charging, you don't ever have to go to a gas station. You just drive over something. You don't even have to plug it in, and that's really convenient. Peter asked, if EV uptake is delayed, does that mean DNSPs should rely on cost-reflective tariffs and wait for smart charging standards to mature? Oh, I don't think it's ever too soon at this stage to start putting in place. How do we want to manage 7 kilowatt loads in the home that can charge up to 80, 100 kilowatt hours? I mean, this makes a 4.8 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt hour Big Bertha electric hot water system just be nothing, right? So getting this load integrated into the system cannot be done too quickly. And just on that, we did a project recently looking at the vehicle to grid standards. And one of the key things that many people probably don't realize is the protection standards on those aren't really in place. I mean, there's work underway to say, look, we should really make these standards consistent with UL 15 something or other. But it's a work in progress. So getting focused on getting those vehicle to grid standards sorted out, especially with respect to interconnection protection, would be a really good idea. John, do you think incentives to cover the cost of smart chargers for your home would be the best way? Look, I haven't seen research so much on whether you put it on upfront rebate or you have it on an ongoing incentive, but there's a lot of creative thinking out there, including maybe providing a discount to charging because you're going to make it up over the longer term. I think to the extent we use rebates to encourage better behavior for the community, that's a good thing. And certainly put it on via, charging units that can be integrated and that are current integrated seems like it could be a win-win-win for the EV driver, for the retailer, and for the rest and for the community. Daniel, do you have a view on the potential impact of EV adoption if a stricter vehicle emission standards is introduced federally? So it really depends on how strict the standards are, but certainly those have been used in other jurisdictions successfully to drive EV adoption. And California is a case in point where the manufacturers are, that really focuses the mind on selling more EVs. if that is the cheapest way for them to achieve that compliance. Josh, how much will battery as a service impact range concerns? Okay, well, that's a really good question. And when we looked at the current range of EVs that are vehicle to grid, we didn't see any restrictions from memory on the use of that battery in vehicle to grid applications. Now that may change and I may be misremembering, but that was a pretty big aha moment from my perspective to see that those that were offering had already taken that into account somehow. Now, once they, if you start using it for FCAS response and it really starts to have an impact, they'll probably revise their policy, but we'll see. But right now, if you've got vehicle to grid, we did not see restrictions on the use of that service. All right. Well, look, we're just about at the top of the hour in certain jurisdictions. I think we can just quickly say right now we look like, how do we do public charging at least cost? It's got the lion's share here with 7 answers. That was my sort of preference, but appreciate everybody's feedback here and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you for attending. Bye for now.